All right, Mayor Avula, thank you for sitting down with me.
Absolutely.
We are just about 1 year away from the water crisis, and coincidentally, also some of your first days as mayor.
Yeah.
Let's just kind of start with where do we stand now? Of course, this was such a massive event for the entire region. Everybody was essentially impacted by this. There's been a lot of work that has gone into trying to get things squared away at the plant so that something like this never happens again. So, where does the plant stand now?
Yeah, I was there just a couple weeks ago to kind of check up on what kind of progress had been made because it has been a really eventful year. I mean, obviously, January 6th happened, and the last 12 months have been, huge investments in equipment and infrastructure, huge investments in people, building out the team and the expertise, and huge investments in culture and really thinking through a culture of preparedness and getting the mindset of our team that operates critical infrastructure into the mindset of emergency response and what do you do when there is an emergency, certainly internally, but also with our regional partners, the work that we've done to do tabletop exercises and build the communication pathways and make sure that when water in one part of the system goes down, how do you use all of the assets of the regional system to be able to maintain pressure in areas. And so it really has been remarkable to see the amount of work that's been done. We can start with the equipment bucket. Obviously the culprit for January 6th was a switchgear that failed after a power outage, and that was replaced immediately. But since then, there have been some really significant investments in backup power. For example, there's a brand new substation that exists now at the water treatment plant, and a new automatic transfer switch that has been integrated. So not only is there a backup for the power supply number one that would automatically switch to power supply number two, but then there is a integrated automatic transfer switch that would automatically shift you to backup generator power. And as you remember, that didn't exist last January. And so, yeah, I think we've done a lot to address the power side of this, implemented new UPS battery backups with extended life to give the team more time if power supplies 1, 2, and 3 were not able to be activated. But Tyler, I feel like our team has done everything possible to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again. And it's still a 100-year-old plant that needs some ongoing investment, and that's part of what we have mapped out over the next few years. And so there will continue to be things that we do. In addition to the power side of the house, we have replaced a lot of the pumps and filters and actuator valves and all the other mechanical parts that were damaged in the flood last year. But there's more work over time that needs to be done, and like I said, the next decade of capital improvement projects has been kind of specced out by Dr. Morris and the team. Um, and then I'll talk about the people side of this because we brought Dr. Morris in, a professional engineer who has experience actually running a municipal or working in a municipal water plant, and then also working at the state level. But as Scott has built his team out, 5 different professional engineers, over 140 years of engineering experience, different staff at multiple levels of the organization, and also we've thought differently about where those staff are situated. So, for example, one of Scott's deputy directors actually has his office at the water treatment plant, and so we have kind of spread the leadership out so that there is a leadership presence in all of the areas of critical infrastructure for the water and combined sewer systems. And then, as I said, we've done a lot of building a culture of responsiveness, right? I think when we look back to January and what had happened previously, there was probably a sense of complacency, right? Like this thing has worked well for years, we haven't had big issues, and you get out of practice about what you need to do when there is an emergency situation. And so Scott and his team have rewritten 54 different standard operating procedures. They're drilling on these on a regular basis. We did an emergency tabletop exercise with our regional partners. And so, part of running critical infrastructure is building that building that mindset. And when I was there a couple weeks ago, it was pretty. I mean, not only was it great to see like these huge new investments that were made and the actual physical, new equipment, but talking to the folks on the ground and hearing their sense of, man, we've done a lot in the last year. There was a sense of accomplishment and pride, and you could see a difference in the leadership and sort of the on-site management team at the water treatment plant.
And so, how involved are you and the rest of maybe top city leadership with emergency preparedness? We just kind of had some winter weather not too
Yeah.
long ago. Are you still at the point now where you feel like, all the top leaders have to be involved in like really monitoring what's going on at the plant to make sure that they are prepared and that they are staffed up and all the equipment is ready to go in the event of a weather event? Or do you feel like now you can be a little bit more hands off and you kind of trust the leadership you have in place at the plant and DPU?
Yeah, obviously, given what we went through a year ago, there's a heightened sense of wanting to know, okay, what preparation activities have we engaged in? But we do have a huge sense of trust in Scott and the team that he's built and the culture that he's built over the last 12 months. And so, even as we were preparing for the December weather events, top leadership is always involved in those decisions about, pre-treatment and closures. And so on our meeting, we would go through DPW talking about what road treatment and bridge closures and things like that. And then Dr. Morris would report out on what preparedness activities DPU is engaged in. So it's definitely a part of our mindset going into weather-related events, but we absolutely have a high sense of confidence in what the team has done over there.
So that's going to be on the checklist for really any weather
Yeah,
event moving forward.
right.
Is we got to have a report from DPU, see what they're doing.
Yeah, that's right.
Got it. Are there any other big ticket equipment items that still need to be replaced or worked on over at the plant? Or do you think that by now most of it, as far as those big items, have been covered?
Yeah, I think the big emergent items, both that had needed to be replaced for years prior and that were damaged, have been replaced. Now, we still made a significant ask to the state and ultimately to the General Assembly for ongoing investments. And so, our ask was about $80 million over the next 2 years. And, I'll give an example of things that we haven't done but would like to do over the next decade. One of the in the assessment of what led to this extended outage in January was the fact that our main equipment infrastructure is below ground, right? We have all these pumps and filters that are below ground, and I
Can
think
get flooded.
yeah, right. And so what happened was when the power went out and the IT system went down and the valves were stuck in the open position, the water filled up that basement where all of the pumps and filters existed, and so they were all submerged under 12 feet of water. And so, I think 100 years ago, there were probably some benefits in trying to use gravity to help the water get to where it needed to be. But as we've seen, that's probably not the best design layout. And so one of the recommendations that was made was to bring those above ground, and that would require an entire redesign of the plant, which is a pretty expensive endeavor. And so those are the kinds of things that we now have multiple power supplies in place and the ability to shut the valves manually and all of those other things to prevent another flooding event. But really, to make the plant as resilient and modernized as possible, we would want to do more significant renovations. And so that's what, as you look out over the next decade of planned capital improvement, those are the kinds of things that we're going to need to do.
And speaking of the $80 million ask, of course, Governor Youngkin, who is outgoing, did not include that in his budget. This budget, of course, will be completely rewritten.
Yeah.
Have you talked to Spanberger
Yeah.
about if she plans to meet that request?
So we have definitely, even prior to the governor's introduction of the budget, we have been working with our delegation, letting them know that this is top priority for us. We've been working with our regional partners because, the state is going to want to know that this is not just the thing that's supporting Richmond, but that Hanover, Chesterfield, and Henrico, who are all dependent on the system in different ways, are also supportive of this being a budget priority. So,
And state buildings.
yeah,
The
that's
General
right.
Assembly, of course,
course.
had to close because of
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
So,
So I think we have laid the groundwork with our local delegation, and certainly have had some initial conversations with the governor-elect's team coming in, and the lieutenant governor-elect as well. And we'll kind of ramp that up as she gets into office. But
so it sounds like nothing concrete yet, but discussions are ongoing.
yeah, and I think everybody who needs to know, including the Speaker of the House and sort of the key legislators, know that this is our top legislative priority going into this General Assembly. So I feel like we've laid the groundwork well. Obviously, as we play out, as the General Assembly plays out, it's a tough year, right? The gaps in Medicaid that the federal government has created, the challenges around SNAP delivery based on new federal legislation. There's a lot of different competing needs, but we will absolutely, advocate as best we can to make sure that we are able to continue investing in the system. Now, what does it actually mean if we don't get funded, right? Like, the system is still in really good shape right now, right? The things that we have prioritized for ongoing investment are things that we want to see happen over the next, somewhere over the next 10 years. We can take a couple of different approaches, right? We can continue to work with the state to try to provide a surge of funding to help accelerate that modernization. Or the backup plan is that it would happen slower, and ultimately what we're trying to avoid is who ends up bearing the brunt of the cost for that, right? Because any capital capital investment that goes into the system has to be paid for through rates. And our desire here is to really protect ratepayers, which is why we're asking for such a significant investment from the state, because the more state money that goes into this, the more that we can keep utility rates from rising.
If you don't get state funding, will you raise rates on the customers?
Yeah, we have already kind of mapped out that there are going to need to be incremental rate increases over time. And, a lot of localities have that kind of fixed into their plan. A lot of localities will have a 5 to 7% escalator on utility rates year in, year out. It's really challenging in a time like this when affordability is such a challenge for so many of our residents. And so we're really trying to minimize the degree that we need to increase rates. But I do anticipate that there will be utility rate increases. I mean, there was last year, and I think will continue to be as we need to invest in the system.
As soon as even next year, looking at raising rates again?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I will be surprised if, unless we have a huge a huge surge of funds from somewhere else, an increase in revenue from some other source. But the thing is that the utility is kind of run as a separate entity. So tax revenues that come from increased, building of apartments or downtown buildings go to support the general fund, not the utility fund. So I do anticipate that we're going to see continued increases. Now, the degree to which that increase is dependent on how much funding can we get from other sources like the state, or if the region were to say, hey, we really want to come together, do a front loading of funds to accelerate the modernization of the plant, and that money, if that money were to come from other localities, we could then keep the rate costs down.
Well, this is going to be hard news for residents to hear. I feel like a lot of city residents feel like they already pay high rates. So to hear that that'll keep going up, of course, probably will be difficult news.
Yeah,
for them.
and it's not so different. Like, we've had rate increases every few years or every other year. And so I think part of what we're trying to do and really, it's part of how we ended up in this situation, right? Like, when we didn't create a business model that could actually support the investment needs of the water infrastructure, it required past leadership to delay or defer maintenance. And so I think, the flip side of that point is that we've been in a deficit for years, and we are going to need to invest wisely to make sure that something like January 6th doesn't happen again.
Right. What is the total price tag over this next decade that you're looking at? if every single one of these infrastructure needs
Yeah.
could be addressed?
Yeah, boy, that's probably a better question for Scott. I think it's close to $1 billion, but
Okay.
the number 270 million, I think, is for the next 5 years. And a lot of that are things that we've talked about, like renovating the plant and bringing pumps and filters up to ground level. But this is not just for the water treatment plant alone, right? These are all of the massive components of our water system, including reservoirs that need to be upgraded and water mains that are really old and need to be replaced, right? And the cost of doing that, the pipe itself, maybe not that expensive, but the cost of excavating, laying new pipe, going back over and repaving, I mean, that's what makes that number ratchet up into the hundreds of millions of dollars.
I want to ask about the consent order. As you know, the city is under two consent orders with the state right now, one from the water crisis and the one from the plates that led to that issue. So part of the consent order requires the city to provide quarterly updates to the Virginia Department of Health. Scott Morris provided this spreadsheet, of course, kind of just laying out all of the deficiencies and whether or not the city had addressed them or if they still needed work. The state replied to this spreadsheet and acknowledged that there's been a lot of progress, but then also said that this spreadsheet didn't contain sufficient information to give the state insights into how exactly the city was addressing all of these failures. And if the city felt like it didn't need to address an issue with corrective action, why not? Dr. Morris replied to that, and he essentially said that they provided enough information to the state as required by the consent order and didn't really have to provide anything else. I'm just curious, why not just provide the state with more information if they're asking for it?
Yeah. Having been on the regulatory side of the house in my past jobs, these processes are a back and forth conversation, right? I mean, it is the regulator sort of looking at the letter of the law and saying, hey, here are the things that are needed for us to approve this. And in my former life as public health director, it was often restaurants or on-site septic systems where they would give us information or they would show us the upgrades, and there's a back and forth. And so that's totally expected. I was actually just on the phone with Dwayne Rucap from VDH yesterday, and I think that overall we have done really well. I mean, I think even hearing from VDH that we're 92% of what's in the consent order has been completed. Yeah. Some parts of that will not be, right? They're just going to take more time, and so we will meet the. I can't remember when the final. It's about 2 years from now where all of these things need to come together. So I don't have any concerns that we will ultimately meet all of the regulatory requirements by the deadline. And I think the back and forth there is just VDH trying to figure out what it needs and our DPU saying, hey, I thought we provided this information. I'm sure we're totally willing and happy to make sure that we meet whatever VDH requires. I mean, obviously, both for our sense of our peace of mind, but also for the public's peace of mind, right? Like the people of Richmond need to know that our system is meeting the state requirements. And so I don't have any concerns that we'll ultimately meet all of the requirements of the consent decree.
So I'm just wondering, I mean, do you think that this is enough? Like, does this suffice for you just saying corrective action taken, resolved, and that just being the update?
Yeah, so remember that in addition to the spreadsheets, we actually have VDH regulatory staff that come out to the water treatment plant on a regular basis. And so that last visit was about 3 weeks ago and received really positive reports. And so I don't worry as much about like the language that's in the spreadsheet because remember VDH's technicians are actually coming out on site sometimes about once a month, but I don't know what frequency they're meeting at this quarter. Scott would be able to answer that.
So for you, this is just like kind of just a documentation
Yeah, and
nitpick as opposed
it's part of
to-
the regulatory back and forth, right? And ultimately, the regulators who are on site will actually inspect the equipment. They will look at our protocols. They will have in-depth discussions with our staff, and I think that will be an added layer of confidence for the people of Richmond who depend on the water supply.
Okay. Will there ever be a water crisis again?
Like nothing's 100% Tyler, but I really do think that we have done everything that we possibly can, both investing in equipment, in building team and expertise, and then in building a mindset of emergency responsiveness. I feel like we've done everything we can to prevent this from happening again.
Okay. Um, any last words you want to say about the water crisis in particular before I move on to maybe some other items?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of what the team has done in under 12 months, right? I think it's really in line with this mentality that I and our team have brought to this work to look for it, find it, and fix it, right? And I never expected to have spent as much time and thought on basic infrastructure as we have, but like the circumstances dictated that that needed to be our priority, and in many ways, I'm glad that it did because I think it has revealed some vulnerabilities in our city and some ways of thinking about how we use our money that we and the people of Richmond need to be thinking differently about. And so, yeah, I'm as hard as it was. I'm grateful for the way that we've come through it, and I hope that ultimately on the other side of this, the people of Richmond take confidence in the work that we're doing to really make sure these like critical elements of what a city needs to do are working.
This might be an annoying question. You've probably gotten it before, but looking back, I mean, would you change anything?
I mean, sure. I wish didn't happen for sure. You know, like it caused a lot of heartache and frustration for a period of a few days. Um, so yeah, if I had to draw it up myself, I would have gladly avoided a water crisis. But I do think we dealt with the situation that we walked into, and the team handled it incredibly well, and it forced us to make other improvements and investments that are going to serve the city well in the long run.